Still struggling with stubborn weight, acne, or irregular periods with PCOS, despite eating healthy? Well, you might be eating foods that are secretly making your symptoms worse. Hi, I'm Hannah, a dietitian with PCOS myself, and today I want to dive into 8 foods to avoid or at least cut back on if you have PCOS, and what to swap these foods with if you want to naturally support your hormone balance and reduce your symptoms. And this list isn't going to include the obvious like fast food, fried food, sugary foods. I feel like we all understand those aren't best for our health, regardless if we have PCOS or not. So with this list, I'm going to be primarily focusing on less obvious foods, and even foods marketed as healthy, but really aren't, especially with PCOS. Be sure to stick around for number 8 because I'm sure that's going to be quite controversial. And now, I believe all foods can fit into a healthy diet, and I don't believe in being crazy restrictive. So it's not that you can never eat these foods ever again. I encourage following the 80-20 principle, where 80% of the time you're trying to eat balanced, eat healthfully, and then the other 20% you can be a little bit more indulgent. I feel like that's a balance that's both healthy and realistic. So let's dive in. So the first one is smoothies and fruit juices. So smoothies are often seen as a easy, healthy option, especially for on the go, and they're full of fruits and other nutritious foods. So surely they're healthy, right? But they could be making your PCOS symptoms worse. And this is because they're often very high in carbohydrates and in sugar, especially store-bought or drive-through smoothies. And they're often very low in fiber or protein. And this is just a recipe for elevated blood sugar and insulin levels, which I talk all about why that's a concern in my video about why it's so hard to lose weight with PCOS. So be sure to check out that video if you want a more detailed explanation about that. And with smoothies, since the food is already blended up, it's already done a lot of the work for your GI tract, which means it doesn't have to work as hard at digesting those foods, and it doesn't take as long to digest. This also means it's likely not to keep you full for very long, and you're probably going to be hungry again within a few hours. So not great for controlling your hunger. And with fresh juices and with juicing, you're essentially just taking those carbs and sugar and extracting them right out of the fruits and vegetables and giving that glucose a fast pass right into your bloodstream. And so I don't recommend juicing or getting fresh pressed juices. Instead, I recommend swapping to just eating whole fruits and vegetables. Then you'll still get all that great fiber, and your digestive tract actually has to work at breaking it down, which means a slower release of glucose into your bloodstream. Or you can also make a homemade blood sugar balancing smoothie as well, which I do have an article on my website with 15 PCOS-friendly smoothie recipes, so I'll leave a link to that in the description below if you love having your smoothies. But the best thing to do is just to eat those whole fruits and vegetables. But you do want to be careful not to eat the fruit by itself, which brings us to the next food to avoid, which is naked carbs. Carbohydrates or carbs are the main food that's going to lead to those elevated blood sugar and insulin levels. And eating those carbs on their own, aka naked carbs, is going to lead to just a massive blood sugar spike, which can lead to those with PCOS having uncontrolled hunger and cravings along with low energy. So this can be like just snacking on pretzels or rice cakes, crackers, or even fruit. Or like just having pancakes for breakfast, even the protein-packed Kodiak cake pancakes that I love so much. But you don't need to completely avoid carbs if you have PCOS. You just want to make sure that you're always pairing those carbs with a fat or a protein. This helps slow down the digestion of those carbs and prevent a blood sugar spike. So this would be like pairing an apple with nut butter, having mashed avocado on toast, having a cheese stick with crackers, or a couple of eggs or a veggie omelet to go with your pancakes for breakfast. It's also important to remember that not all carbs are created equal when it comes to PCOS, and that brings us to our next food to avoid, which is refined carbohydrates. These are carbs such as white bread, white pasta, white rice, cereals, chips, and the biggest issue with these is that they usually have very little to no fiber, and that fiber is so crucial for slowing down digestion and lowering that blood sugar, and it keeps you fuller for longer, and it helps to feed that good bacteria in your gut, which can do wonders for your gut health and lowering inflammation. And since refined carbohydrates are lacking in that fiber, they often lead to blood sugar and insulin spikes, which can lead to less controlled hunger, more cravings, and more difficulty losing weight. So you want to swap those refined carbohydrates for what we call complex carbs. These complex carbs provide a bunch of great fiber along with other vitamins and minerals, and this includes foods like whole wheat bread, brown rice, whole wheat pasta, and oats. And if you want more ideas on how to create PCOS-friendly meals that include these complex carbs, be sure to check out my free 7-day PCOS menu plan. It includes breakfast, lunch, and dinner ideas along with a shopping list and a bunch of recipes. I'll leave a link in the description below. Now, the next food to avoid with PCOS is low-fat or fat-free dairy. Now, there's a lot of talk about how dairy is terrible for PCOS, but this isn't entirely true. In fact, a lot of studies show that it's low-fat or fat-free dairy that can cause hormone imbalance and is the most harmful for PCOS, whereas full-fat dairy can help with supporting your hormones. This is especially true if you're trying to get pregnant with PCOS. So you don't have to go completely dairy-free. I recommend just swapping to full-fat dairy. I know I have seen a huge improvement in my skin and acne since switching to full-fat dairy, and I definitely notice flare-ups when I have low-fat or fat-free options. And now I do find a lot of my clients with PCOS do have a lactose intolerance, myself included. And so sometimes the lactose in dairy can be the cause of that inflammation and those GI issues like bloating. So swapping to a lactose-free full-fat dairy can be really beneficial. This is why I love the Fairlife whole milk, because it's lactose-free, it's ultra-filtered to be higher in protein. No, this is not sponsored. I just love their products. So that's the milk that we use in our house. And I will say there are some studies that show consuming too much dairy can aggravate symptoms like acne. And so you don't want to overdo it and consume too much. It's usually best to just stick to 2 to 3 servings of dairy a day and not go over that. And so I usually just stick to using milk in like baking and cooking, like when I'm making overnight oats, or as creamer in my morning coffee. And speaking of drinks, let's look at certain types of drinks you should definitely avoid if you have PCOS. And that's artificially sweetened beverages. So it's really tempting when you're trying to cut back on sugar to turn to those zero sugar or sugar-free drinks, and there's certainly no shortage of them on the market. I feel like every week there's some new sugar-free drink option out there. So a lot of companies are definitely jumping on this bandwagon. And the issue with these is that while they won't spike your blood sugar because they are lower in carbs and sugar, they will still spike your insulin levels. And having consistently elevated insulin levels is one of the things that can make it really difficult to lose weight with PCOS, even if you're eating less and moving more. So instead of choosing these drinks, swap for just water, sparkling water, or unsweetened tea. And speaking of teas, this next item is a tea drink that might not be helping your PCOS as much as you think, and that's kombucha. So kombucha is a fermented tea that's hailed as a healthy, functional drink because of the live active cultures, aka good bacteria, that can help promote gut health. But the kicker is that these drinks usually have quite a bit of sugar in them, most of them anywhere between 12 and 20 grams of sugar. And then also going back to our naked carbs, if you're drinking this as an afternoon pick-me-up or on an empty stomach, it's just going to be another straight shot of glucose right into your bloodstream, which means these drinks aren't going to be as beneficial for your PCOS or your health like you might think. So instead, swap the kombucha for an unsweetened tea like green tea or spearmint tea. These are both really beneficial for PCOS. And if you do love kombucha, there are some that are lower in sugar that can still be good. One brand I love is called Remedy Kombucha. They have some delicious flavors, and they're sweetened with a sweetener that doesn't raise your insulin levels, which is great. Or another really great swap you could do is a homemade apple cider vinegar drink. So one of the things with kombucha is it kind of has a vinegary taste, which I quite enjoy, to be honest. And so if you like that type of drink, you can make your own apple cider vinegar drink. And studies show that consuming vinegar before your meal can greatly decrease the blood sugar spike from it. So you can enjoy a nice diluted apple cider vinegar drink before your meal, and it'll do a lot of benefit for your PCOS symptoms. And so for this, just take a couple tablespoons of apple cider vinegar and dilute it with like 12 to 16 ounces of water. And if it's too vinegary, just keep adding more water until it's the taste that you like. So this can be a great substitute for kombucha as well. And if you want to try that homemade apple cider vinegar drink at home, be leery of any recipe you might find online that tells you to add this next food, which is honey. So honey is another food that has such a health halo around it and is thought to be this health superfood, but we need to remember what it really is, which is sugar. And it's considered an added sugar at that. And I see a lot of women with PCOS will add honey to their tea to sweeten it, or to their yogurt, or a lot of recipes that claim to be sugar-free will have you add honey. And you may think that that's better for your PCOS than just adding straight sugar, but your body's going to digest it the exact same way. And it's still going to cause that spike in blood sugar and a spike in insulin. So if you're looking for some type of sweetener, I recommend swapping to stevia or monk fruit. These are sweeteners that don't raise your blood sugar sugar or your insulin levels. Stevia is the one I use, so I recommend swapping to either of those. And that brings us to our last and probably the most controversial on this list, which are coconut oil and butter. I'm grouping both of these together because both of these have become very popular, it seems, with keto and carnivore, but it's important to remember that both of these are very high in saturated fat, which that's the unhealthy fat that's going to raise our bad cholesterol levels. And I know there's a lot of debate out there around coconut oil and that they're MCTs and it's not metabolized the same way as other saturated fats and blah, blah, blah. We still have studies that show that the saturated fat in coconut oil can raise your bad cholesterol. And women with PCOS are already at a higher risk of developing heart disease and having high cholesterol, so we don't need any help in this department. And saturated fat can also worsen your inflammation. I know there's studies that show coconut oil can be anti-inflammatory, but it's important to note these have been primarily done on animals. These are animal studies, not human studies. So there's still not a lot of concrete evidence around this. And the same goes for butter. We know this is high in saturated fat and it can raise your cholesterol. But some will argue that grass-fed butter is higher in omega-3 healthy fats, which are anti-inflammatory. And yes, omega-3 is my go-to recommendation to help my clients with PCOS lower inflammation. We're always talking about how to increase the omega-3 in their diets because it's so beneficial. But the thing is, you would have to eat a lot of this grass-fed butter to get a substantial amount of omega-3 for it to make a difference. So it's not going to be a good source of omega-3 in your diet. Relying on those foods like fatty fish like salmon and tuna are going to be a much better source of omega-3 to help with reducing inflammation. So my current professional opinion as someone who's been a dietitian for almost 10 years, and this may change down the road because we don't know everything. We're always learning more about nutrition. I certainly don't know everything. But currently, I do not recommend my clients with PCOS to have coconut oil or butter be staples in their diet because it's likely going to increase your cholesterol and just worsen your inflammation. Instead, I recommend swapping these to avocado oil or olive oil, as these have a lot stronger evidence showing that they support heart health and reduce inflammation. And like I said, that's not to say you can never use butter. We still have butter in our house. We'll still use it sometimes for foods like green beans or in our baking or on baked potatoes. So it's not like we never use it, but it's not the main staple. Primarily we'll use avocado oil or olive oil. Now that we've talked about the foods to avoid, let's talk about the foods that you should be eating with PCOS. Check out this video where I go into the best diet for PCOS that's easy and realistic. I hope you found this one helpful. Remember to nourish yourself with grace, and I'll catch you in the next one.